Good morning. I'm Bruce Gordon with the Minnesota Department of Public Safety. Today we are updating you regarding a deadly crash that occurred in Burnsville last night following a pursuit in which both Apple Valley Police Department and Burnsville Police Department were involved. You'll hear from Colonel Matt Langer, the Chief of the Minnesota State Patrol. Also available to answer questions, Chief Eric Gisecki from Burnsville Police Department. That last name is spelled Gieseke. Also Chief John Rexegel from the Apple Valley Police Department. His last name is spelled Rechdtzigel. I'll have those spellings for you after the news conference as well. Colonel Matt Langer.
Thanks, Bruce. Well, good morning, everybody. Here today to talk about a tragedy that occurred in the city of Burnsville last evening, and I'll give you just a brief rundown on the sequence of events, and also wanted to just say that we're about 12 hours after this incident, so obviously it's still under investigation, and we believe it to be an active investigation at this time, so I won't be able to speak about every detail or answer every question that you might have, but I'll try my best. Last night, about 8:09 p.m., there was a hit-and-run crash that occurred in the city of Savage. Savage PD responded to that scene and discussed what happened with the driver that remained on scene and had a vehicle description and license plate number of the other vehicle that was involved that did not stop and provide information to the other driver. Moments later, a few minutes later, Apple Valley police officers were in the area, and an Apple Valley police officer within their city witnessed a van, a Chevy Astro van that had some aggressive driving conduct. And about the same time that that officer was recognizing that driving conduct and preparing to make a traffic stop, about that same time, that officer received information that this vehicle, the van, was involved in this hit and run and indeed was being sought by Savage police for that incident in their community. The pursuit started about 2019 or 8:19 p.m. That's about the time when the officer saw the van, and about 8 miles later, just a few minutes later, that van was involved in a deadly crash that killed both the driver of a Toyota and ultimately led to the death of the driver that was fleeing from police officers at the time. So the pursuit was initiated by Apple Valley Police Department. Their officers pursued. Moments later, they were assisted in that pursuit by Burnsville police. I received notification then later on as a result of that deadly crash, the double fatality that they were requesting, the chief of Burnsville was requesting the State Patrol to not only reconstruct what occurred with that crash, but also to lead the investigation into that collision. And so that's where we stand. We had troopers there last night working with both agencies, and both families involved, making sure that we were notifying everyone of what was going on. The investigation is active, ongoing. 12 hours later, we don't have a lot of answers, but we'll do our best. And both chiefs are here to answer questions as well. I'll just say that, these are always tragic situations, and our hearts go out to the families that are involved. And once again, we see the danger of drivers making bad choices. And last night there was certainly a driver involved in this fatal crash that made a bad choice, not only in Savage, continued to make bad choices going down the road, and made incredibly poor choices that resulted in the death of another motorist on our roadway. I'll be available for any questions that you might have. First and foremost, you may be wondering about the victims' names and the driver of the pursued vehicle, his name. We're going to wait and let the Hennepin County Medical Examiner release that information after they make positive identification. And once that happens, as soon as we have it, we'll release that on our media website, so it'll be available to you like you usually see. Any questions for me on what I just discussed or the investigation?
The speed down in the crash? The speed of the vehicle?
Yeah, that's all going to be part of the reconstruction. So there's usually two questions that come up in pursuit. So how fast was it? And then for us, really an important piece of information is how fast were both vehicles going at the time of a collision. And that's a standard question that we seek to answer every time we do a reconstruction. And we'll do that in this case as well. But I don't have an approximate speed for the pursuit as I stand here right now, and I don't have the speed at the time of the collision either.
So what the posted speed is, and you know, describe that road. Is it a 2-lane highway, 4-lane?
Yeah, I'm gonna probably defer that question to Chief Gieske, both on the speed limit and the roadway.
Sure. I can answer that. The crash occurred on County Road 5, northbound in the area of 131st Street. It's a county road, obviously. It's 2 lanes northbound, 2 lanes southbound. And I believe the speed limit at that particular area is 40 miles an hour.
How fast were the officers that were pursuing driving?
Again, as the colonel indicated, that's information I don't have yet, and once the investigation's done, I'm sure that'll be available.
Can you tell me the protocol for a chase? I mean, what is the determination that you guys are going to follow?
That's a great question. I think it's important to note that most agencies have similar, but some differences within their police policy. Our pursuit policy specifically in this particular case, I want to be clear, it was Apple Valley's pursuit. We were assisting them, and we still have to review all the information preliminarily. It appears that we were within our policy, and I actually have copies of our police policy available. In the back of the room, our communications coordinator is here to hand those out so you can read specifically what our policy says. We're in the process of putting it on our website as well, so you can just log on to the City of Burnsville website, go to the Police Department main page, and scroll down. There will be a list of policies, and this will be one that we'll add this afternoon. So some of those questions you have might be inside the actual policy itself.
This collision occur in an intersection, or what was? How did this happen? Was it a broadside? Was it a passing maneuver? Do you know what? Oops, sorry.
Yeah, what we believe happened is that the vehicle that was being pursued was northbound, and the other vehicle involved, the Toyota, was southbound, either making a left-hand turn or making a U-turn. And we'll attempt to determine that definitively through the reconstruction. But the actual crash itself was more of a head-on type collision as a result of the way both vehicles were being driven at the time.
Does that mean that he swerved into her lane?
We don't know that yet, but that'll be something that we'll certainly look at as part of the reconstruction.
And how far away were the officers that were pursuing at the time that the crash happened?
We think, again, that'll be part of the investigation, but the preliminary information is that they were quite a distance behind, and in fact, we don't know that they actually witnessed the collision itself, but that's something that we'll look closely at as part of the investigation.
Colonel, how many total officers were involved in the pursuit?
I'm Chief John Rexkel with the Apple Valley Police Department. First of all, I just want to offer my condolences to the families involved in this and affected by it. There were 3 Apple Valley squad cars involved in this pursuit, and I believe at least one, possibly a second Burnsville squad assisting. Obviously, after this crash, there were many emergency vehicles on scene.
Chief, is it your opinion that if the officers had backed off on the chase, that the crash might have been prevented?
I can't offer an opinion on that right now. We're going to be taking a comprehensive look on this entire situation.
Could you give us an idea of how much of a distance they did pursue the officers from beginning to end?
I believe it was around 7 miles.
And do you know how fast your officers were going during the chase?
I just can't comment right now on that. That's going to be something that'll come forward in the investigation. I do want to add, though, this driver demonstrated complete disregard for the safety of others in that crash in Savage. And then my officer, who initiated this pursuit, was actually initiating a traffic stop. This driver was again violating motor vehicle laws, following too closely, driving aggressively. That was the reason for the initial stop in Apple Valley. And at that time, that driver chose to flee.
Are the officers that were involved in it still on active duty?
We're going to be dealing with that this afternoon. They finished their shift out at the station, completing reports and such, and we'll be making a determination this afternoon.
Do you have identities and names for those officers involved?
What's that?
Do either of you have names for the officers involved in the
Not releasing them at this point. Those are all being provided to the State Patrol for the investigation.
when that will be released?
I think we'll try to get most of them out today, if not all of them out today, but there's at least one officer that has yet to be interviewed, so we'll get that out as fast as we possibly can.
Colonel, can you give us at least ages of those involved, the driver of both vehicles?
I'm hesitant to comment on either one, particularly because one of them needs to be positively identified yet. But again, I'm hopeful that between us and Hennepin County, we can get you all that information yet today. If likely, it's up to Hennepin County, but we'll get it out as fast as we can.
The person that you were pursuing, was this person known to you guys? Does that person have a criminal history with you guys?
We don't know the identity of the person in the Astro van, and because that person chose to leave the scene in Savage, they didn't know who he was either.
So you don't know if it was the registered owner of the vehicle yet at this point?
We don't know that.
Other than this hit and run in Savage, any reason this particular individual would be fleeing police?
Well, in our experience, people flee for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's just an amazingly poor choice, and they flee because they didn't want to stop and face the consequence for whatever driving infraction they may have been involved with. Other times people are impaired and they don't want people to know that. Other times they have a warrant. Other times the vehicle is stolen. There's just a multitude of reasons why people decide not to stop. In a lot of these incidents, of course, there's scrutiny all the way around, as there should be in cases where people are killed in our communities. But make no mistake, this pursuit was avoidable, and this double fatality crash was avoidable. All it took was for the driver of that Chevy van to stop, both in Savage or when Apple Valley saw that van. Had that driver made the wise decision to stop, everything that we're talking about would have been prevented.
Chief, can you share Apple Valley's policies on high-speed chases?
Those will be available at the end of the conference also.
Would you say that the officers were operating within your policies then in that pursuit?
At this point, I believe they were, but we haven't taken a full look at this.
How much discretion do they have to engage in a pursuit or stop a pursuit?
There's discretion.
Way towards benefits for public safety versus
Right,
capturing?
right. There's discretion allowed for the officers, and the supervisor is expected to monitor those pursuits and make sure the conditions. You know, always want to pay attention to what the road conditions are, how many other motorists are out there. There's a lot of variables you have to consider.
Do we know when the last death of a witness or just a bystander was during a police pursuit in the state here?
I don't have that information top of mind. I wanted to make sure the timeline was clear too, that the hit and run crash occurred at 8:09 p.m. and that at about 8:15 p.m. was when the official attempt to locate was communicated from Savage to another law enforcement agency. The Apple Valley officer reported seeing the vehicle at 8:19, and about the time of 8:19 was when the officer from Apple Valley also figured out through dispatch that this was the vehicle that was involved in the Savage hit and run, and then about 6 minutes later was when the crash occurred.
Can you tell us anything about the hit and run at Savage? Is that victim okay?
Yeah,
Who is the victim?
we'll get that information out through our office later today, but we don't believe there were injuries involved, perhaps minor injuries, but it was a rather benign type crash from my understanding, and the driver, again in the Chevy van, just decided to not stop and left, and fortunately the other driver involved was able to get a description and the license plate and provided that information to Savage Police.
Was that on a highway or, freeway or what?
That crash occurred on Highway 13.
Chief, although you are giving us the policy, could you tell us on camera just a kind of a basic idea of when a pursuit happened, when the suspect is unknown, not known whether they're a violent offender or someone that would cause a danger if they escape later on?
Right. As I stated before, it's going to count on a lot of variables being considered. And, these are very fluid situations, and they're obviously high risk. Officer has to make a lot of decisions rapidly, but it's going to depend on, initially, the traffic conditions. And you'll see in pursuits, when you watch these videos, law enforcement frequently will back off. They'll gain ground when there's clear roadways, but they're always trying to show due regard. They come to intersections, they don't just blast through them. They're easing up on things and actually hitting brakes. So those are considered. I know there were communications, as would be appropriate, between the supervisor and the officers, just monitoring, what the speeds were, what the traffic conditions.
Did the driver have a valid DL, or was it restricted?
We don't know that.
We don't know if the driver does.
Hey, one more question.
Should police pursuit policies be reviewed, in light of this crash, in light of other incidences? I mean, are they too liberal as they stand now?
Well, I can't speak for every chief, but I know in Minnesota the Post Board requires every law enforcement agency to have a policy related to vehicle pursuits. And I think I'm like a lot of agency heads in Minnesota that we're continually evaluating our policies, pursuits, and others to make sure that they're consistent with best practices, consistent with the desire of the community, and to just make sure that we're providing the best service possible when it comes to doing law enforcement work.
Okay, thank you all.